back to the podcast. How are you doing? How was your week? Mine was, if I'm honest, very stressful. Work was crazy. It was bananas crazy. I hope your week was not as stressful as mine, but if it was, welcome to the weekend. Happy Sunday. My name is Brandon. I'm an Enneagram coach, and here at Aim and Anchor, we believe that the Enneagram is one of the best tools to understand the story in which you live and the lens through which you see. This tool helps you improve communication and understand your relationship with shame, anger, and fear in a way that you've never, ever known. So, let's get started. This week, here on the podcast, we are going to be talking about defense mechanisms. And basically what I want to do, I've already talked about defense mechanisms before back in season 1 of the podcast, but I want to talk about it in a way that's kind of like a micro coaching session. So if you're listening or watching, that's kind of what I want to try to go at today. That being said, let's define defense mechanisms before we go into each of the types, because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what the defense mechanism is for each of the 9 types, a brief description of what that looks like for each of the 9 types, and then I have a couple of questions. And the questions that I'm pulling from and the defense mechanism definitions for each of the type, I'm also pulling from my own guide sheets, so that when you just as a helpful bit of information, when we sit down together and we go through coaching sessions, I have 5 different guide sheets that I give you for each of the 5 weeks that we have together. Now, I do have a 3 session package that you can use or that we can go through, and just the first 3, session 1, 2, and 3. If you go for the bigger one, obviously there's session 4 and 5 and more that comes with that. But what I'm trying to let you know is, like, I have physical sheets that you get when you go into coaching, and that's where I'm pulling this information from this week. So I don't have a book like with me that I normally, I mean, they're all right there, of course, but I don't have a book with me I'm pulling this information directly from. I'm pulling this directly from the guide sheets in which you would get if you were to do coaching sessions with me. So you kind of have an idea of what this looks like. So micro coaching, there you go. So let's define defense mechanisms as a whole in general first before we go anywhere else, okay? And again, if you're new with us this week and you're seeing me on YouTube and you're like, why isn't he looking at the camera? It's because I have my computer screen right over here on my left. So when I do some reading, that's where I'm looking. So defense mechanism is a mental process initiated typically unconsciously to avoid conscious conflict or anxiety. That is the definition there, so I'm going to read it one more time. Defense mechanism, defined as a mental process initiated typically unconsciously to avoid conscious conflict or anxiety. All right? So that is the general definition of defense mechanism. And now I want to go through each of the types. We're going to start at type 8 and work our way through and read what the defense mechanism is. Oh, that was a tough one for each of the types and what that looks like. And then a few questions that I would ask you normally in a coaching session. So here we go. The defense mechanism for type 8, which is where we're starting today, is denial. This looks like this. People who unconsciously negate something that makes them feel anxious by disavowing its very existence. This can be thoughts, feelings, wishes, sensations, needs, or even relationships that are dissatisfactory or upsetting to them. All right? So pull up my guide sheet here for type 8. And I just want to give you a little bonus here. As a type 8, if you think that you are or you know you are, you may also deny, forget, or completely ignore unpleasant things. You may deny that you were hurtful or insensitive to others because you have not allowed yourself to remember or even recognize that it occurred. So, a couple of questions I would normally ask you if we were in a coaching session together. And this is coming from session number 4 for each of the types. We go into defense mechanisms and childhood messages in session 4. But I just wanted to kind of give you hopefully a helpful tip to work through this week. So one of the main questions I would ask is, how do you see this defense mechanism as helpful for you in your daily life? The other side of that coin is, how is it hurtful? So again, like I said in the intro, the Enneagram helps us understand what storyline we are living in and what our relationship is with anger, shame, and fear. When we realize that we are not living in a storyline that is true, most of the time in an unconscious behavior, we are living in a false story. The Enneagram helps us understand the true story, the real narrative that we get to live into if we're able to let go of that white knuckle grip of the storyline that used to work for us. As an adult, when you go out into the world, we're going to release that storyline and hold on to one that's more true. So the question again, how do you usually see it as helpful, and how does it cause you harm? And then the last question that I'll ask here, I have more that we would normally ask in a session, but what would it look like for, if you can think about a week, great. If you can't, think about a day. If you can think about it for an hour, who cares what time frame you need to like kind of shrink it down to or expand it to, whatever works for you. But what would it look like to not use denial as a defense mechanism? Right? Simple question, but think about it in this way. Instead of holding on to denial and ignoring the things that are actually happening, what would it look like? This is a different way to phrase this. What would it look like if you just accepted I may have hurt somebody here. I may have overstepped my bounds. I may have overdone anger like I'm prone to do. Again, this is type A, right? Those two questions there for you for this week. How do you usually see this as helpful, in quotations? How does it cause you harm? And what would it look like if you chose to not deny and actually allow in some of those more uncomfortable things about your hardwiring and how it shows up in the world? This doesn't make you bad. It makes none of us bad. We are human beings trying to figure out how to do this thing called life. You've never done today before. You will never have done tomorrow before. So let's give ourselves some grace here, a little bit of forgiveness, right? If you have any questions, obviously, like I say most weeks, I think, send me an email, brandon@aimandanchorcoaching.com. If you have more questions, if you are interested in coaching, obviously, I'm all ears. I love going through this content with people and helping people out. It's the best. Let's go down to type 9s. The defense mechanism for type 9s is narcotization. I myself am a type 9. I know this one well, and I did this yesterday. Not happy about it, but the whole day got on top of me. I was stressed out of my mind. Anger took over, and I needed to figure out how to cool down. And I did eventually, but in the moment, it took over. This, again, is the definition of narcotization for type 9s. These are people who unconsciously numb themselves to avoid something that feels too large, complex, difficult, or uncomfortable to handle by engaging in routines that are familiar and require very little attention and provide comfort. My type 9 friend, you out there that's listening, I'm going to give you a little bonus here. Because you desire to have inner stability and peace of mind, you try to avoid conflicts at all costs. If you are a type 9 and you know at least a little bit about the Enneagram, you know this well. If you are unable to do this, to avoid the conflict, and something feels too large, complex, difficult, or uncomfortable to handle, then you will unconsciously numb out, check out mentally, basically, and really that's basically what we're doing. We're calling it narcotization. As a type 9, you're narcotizing or disassociating. Here are your questions to help with this. Again, the same question as type 8. How do you typically see narcotization as helpful? The other side of that coin, how does it actually cause you harm? And then 2, what would it look like to not disassociate, to not numb out? What would it be like to actually stay in the present moment? Listen up, type 9. I'm talking to myself here. Listen up, Brendan. What would it look like to not disassociate or numb out? Now, I will say there were moments yesterday for myself where I actually was on my way out mentally. I was going like, I can't do it. I'm out. I can't handle this. This is too much. It's too stressful. I'm out. And I realized I physically was removing myself from the room, and I caught it. I was very proud of myself. I turned around and I was like, as uncomfortable as this is, you will not be overcome. So I stayed in it. Did I stay in it forever? Absolutely not. It continued to get worse. I continued to make it worse in my own head. And eventually I melted down. Okay? So to my staff, if you're listening, I apologize. I didn't yell at anybody, but I was very angry, visibly frustrated, and the team knew it. I actually at least said it to, in our chat group of like, you know what? I need to take a break. My anger's too much. I got to get out of here. So there you go. That's the defense mechanism for type 8. Let's move over to type 1s. The defense mechanism for type 1s is reaction formation. And this looks like this. These are people who try to reduce or eliminate anxiety caused by their own thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that they consider to be unacceptable. So, they react in a manner that is the opposite of what they are feeling. Very simple one that a lot of us in the Enneagram world would say is you can tell a type 1 is angry when there's a smile on their face, but there's a tension behind the smile. Meaning they don't want to get that anger out because that anger is viewed as bad. So they suppress it, put on a happy face, and then somehow, some way, I promise you, it comes out sideways as resentment. If we look at our guide sheet for type 1, your bonus here is you have high standards and principles, obviously. Keeping your emotions and behaviors in control is a top priority for you, obviously. You never want to display emotions that are out of control or inappropriate. What that means is if an emotion is deemed inappropriate, and this can be different for all types of ones, right? Depends on how you were brought up, depends what home life was like, on what you deem personally as your standard or principle. Okay, so it's not going to look identical for each one, but this is generally a true statement for the most part. If you have a type 1 in your life, or you are a type 1, that inappropriate emotion will come up. The opposite of whatever that is will then come up afterwards to suppress, because we don't want to be bad because of these emotions. Here is your question, type 1. Defense mechanisms are used because we believe that they have worked. So how do you think that this has helped you? We believe that these defense mechanisms work because, well, that's just the storyline in which we're living, right? So the question, again, is how has this worked or helped you in your daily life, and how has it hurt you? And then your next question is similar to the other ones, but what would it look like to be receptive, flexible, open-hearted, and forgiving, and notice the words here, towards yourself and others, right? So which one's first? You are first, then others. What would it be like to be receptive, flexible, open-hearted, and forgiving towards yourself and towards others? So that's really kind of the opposite of what a defense mechanism is, or the reaction formation, right? Being able to say, hey, here's an emotion. That's okay. That doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make me bad. They're just indicators. There you go. All right. Moving on to type 2. The defense mechanism for type 2 is repression. And it looks like this. These are people who hide information about themselves from themselves. Let's read that again, because that's a very, very fascinating statement to me. Again, this is repression for a type 2. And these are people who hide information about themselves from themselves. This information can be feelings, desires, wishes, aversions, fears, and needs. These are too difficult to acknowledge consciously, so they push it down inside themselves in order to control it. All right? So that's repression in a type 2, and pulling over our guide sheet here. And here's your bonus, type 2. The truth is really the opposite of what you believe in your defense mechanism that will work. So here's the truth. When you acknowledge your needs and share them directly, keyword, by asking for help, you see that others do love and want to serve you. But the storyline that you're going in is that they don't. They don't want to serve you. You must give in order to get, right? So, again, how is this naturally? This is happening in you. So how do you feel like this is helping you? And how is it hurtful? And I think I may have said this multiple times on different other episodes, but writing things down is quite helpful. Like I wish I want to write, like physically handwrite more, but I hate my handwriting and it seems really slow. Not good enough reasons, but I like typing a lot more. Anyways, so again, how do you feel like your defense mechanism is helpful and how is it harmful? And then your last question would be, what would it look like to actually live into the truth that we were talking about, which is acknowledging the need, acknowledging the fear, acknowledging X thing that you deal with most, that you feel like you need to push down in order to get what you need? What are some other healthy ways that you can accomplish what you are wanting? Because you, my type 2 friend, are deserving of all the good that you want in your life, and you don't have to earn it to get it. All right, let's talk about type 3s and their defense mechanism. The defense mechanism for type 3 is identification, and this is what that looks like. These people unconsciously incorporate attributes and characteristics of another person into their own personality and sense of self as a way of bolstering their self-esteem and forming an imaginary or real alliance with the person that they admire. What that means, if we look at our guide sheet for type 3, is you fear, and this is your bonus, type 3, you fear rejection for being yourself. So you identify and embody the admirable qualities of people that you desire or that you like, instead of being your true, authentic self. Now, the questions for you, type 3, are the same. How do you find this as helpful? And how does it actually cause you harm in your daily life? And what are some healthy ways that you can go about your life and accomplish what you are wanting without pulling those things from the other person? Instead of identifying from the other, coming back to your authentic self and living out of that space. What would that look like? Moving on to type 4, the defense mechanism for type 4s is called introjection. That looks like this. Instead of repelling critical information and negative experiences that cause anxiety or pain, the type 4 introjects this information, meaning they fully absorb the information. They internalize it and incorporate the data into their sense of self. Again, pulling over the guide sheet for type 4, here's your bonus for type 4. It is hard for you to realize that this defense mechanism, introjection, does not fend off negativity. It creates a deep well of self-deprecating statements that continually shame you. And remember at the beginning of the episode, I talked about how the Enneagram helps us understand the story in which we are living and our relationship with shame, anger, and fear. Now, type 4s find themselves in the feeling triad, the heart-centered triad, and the fixation for this triad is shame. The question I have for you, type 4, is how is this helpful, or how do you believe this is helpful? Remember, what story are we living in? And how does it actually cause you harm? Write that down. And then, what would be a healthy way of going about what you want and need from relationships and from yourself? What does it look like to not use introjection? Instead of taking the data in, attaching it to self, what if you just took the data in and left it there? You didn't allow it or require it to bring you into the darkness. There's a question for you. Type 5. Let's talk about type 5s. The defense mechanism for type 5s is called isolation, and it reads like this. These are people who avoid feeling overwhelmed and empty by isolating themselves, retreating into their minds, cutting themselves off from their feelings and other people, and compartmentalizing their life. Basically separating each part of your life into individual boxes. So that's isolation. So this is what it looks like for type 5. And here's your bonus. This strategy of isolation gives you the illusion of being effective since it allows you to restore your energy reserves, which is important. I'm not saying that it's not. But it can cause real harm to the relationships you long to have so desperately. It also causes harm in the maintaining of that relationship. Your questions are the same. How do you view this as helpful? How has it actually caused you harm, not only at work, but at home. And here's your other question I have for you, my type 5, is in what ways can you work to give more of yourself to others? That's going to be a strenuous activity for you. It will be a lifelong work, but it's a very important question for you to ask. All right, type 6s, let's talk about your defense mechanism. And that defense mechanism is projection. And that looks like this. People who unconsciously attribute their own unacceptable, unwanted, or disowned thoughts, emotions, motivations, attributes, and or behaviors to others. So a lot of us probably know this one well, but I just want to read it again to clarify. Again, it's projection, and it sounds like this. People who unconsciously attribute their own unacceptable, unwanted, or disowned thoughts, emotions, motivations, attributes, and or behaviors onto others. Okay, pulling out guide sheet for type 6. Here's your bonus, type 6. To you, your projections are the reality. You will project more often when anxious. And if you are a type 6, maybe that is just now beginning your journey, you are going, I'm anxious all the time. Good indicator, right? To you, your projections are reality, and you will project more often when you are anxious. Again, how has it worked for you? How has it actually harmed you? Think about that. Sit with it for a little bit. And then give a couple of examples of how your anxiety inhibits you seeing actual reality, right? So if we're looking at our bonus thing, you will project when more often when anxious. So how is your anxiety or your fears inhibiting from you seeing actual reality? How has your anxiety played a major part in your life? Spend some time with those ones. Like I said, physically write it out. It would be really, really helpful for you, I think. Last but not least, my type 7 friends, I'm going to be honest with you. I kind of love going in this order, just a little bit, because it puts type 7s last, and I know that they want to get into it like so fast. It's not fair, I know it, but also my dad is a type 7, so I don't know. I can picture my dad going like, when is it? Come on, when's it my turn? Sorry, Dad. I love you. Love you. All right. Type 7's defense mechanisms. The defense mechanism for type 7 is rationalization. It sounds like this. People who explain their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to themselves and others in a way that completely avoids or obscures their true motivations, intentions, or the effects of their behavior. They normally turn negative to positive. We briefly talked about this last week. Let's read it one more time. Rationalization is what it's called, and it sounds like this. People who explain their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to themselves and others in a way that completely avoids or obscures their true motivations, intentions, or the effects of their behavior, turning negative to positive. If we pull out our last guide sheet here for type 7, here is your bonus, my type 7 friend. You are a skilled master at charming your way out of being in trouble by spinning any negative situation into one that sounds positive, fun, and exciting to others. You are so upbeat, positive, and likable that it is hard for others to stay angry or upset with you. Really what that means is, how are you using that knowledge of yourself and how you are viewed by others to rationalize the things in your everyday life that may actually need some more time to be sat with. Maybe there is more things in your world than you realize that don't necessarily need a positive spin. They just need to be. Your questions are, how is it helpful? And how is it actually harmful for you in your everyday life? And what would it look like to not rationalize? How can you lean into painful feelings and uncomfortable situations, knowing they are part of the human experience and provide the necessary contrast to the positive emotions you seek? To wrap that up, a couple weeks ago, I sat down with a new friend of mine, Michaela, from Don't Worry, You're Enough, another podcast, talking about Enneagram and all things fun. So we talked about, I brought the idea of one of the things I love about the Enneagram, which was balance. Nature balances itself. We see it all the time. The storylines in which we live, we try to keep it in an unbalanced realm, meaning I believe that this will work. So for the type 7, this rationalization thing of I will always, we just flip it. What's wrong with flipping it to the positive? That's great. That is great. Not all of the time, right? Because it works sometime doesn't mean it works every time. So we're talking about in the idea of balance, especially for our type 7, bringing it back to understanding that these uncomfortable, painful parts of life are necessary. They help us understand the joy of life because of the other side of the coin. So how can you bring balance back to your emotions? Be present with your emotions. Don't search out for the future to ignore and avoid, but be present with it. All right, that is the podcast for the week. I wanted to kind of, like I said at the beginning, at the top of the show, I wanted to just kind of give you an example of what it would be like if we sat down and coached together, you and I. If you are interested in coaching, I haven't really specifically talked about offering coaching. I really just want to give information and helpful tips because I have seen how it has helped me in my life immensely. I'm a better human because of this tool that we call the Enneagram. And I just love it and I want to share it out. So if you are interested in coaching, please feel free to contact me, Brandon at aimandanchorcoaching.com. You can also go to my website, aimandanchorcoaching.com, to find out all of my coaching packages, what I offer. I can get you a breakdown of each of the sessions. Like I said, you get guide sheets, all of this fun stuff, regular communication with me. It's the best. I love doing it. And if you haven't done it yet, please consider doing it. Not necessarily, yes, with me, but if you feel like you need somebody else that is more your style, I know plenty of people. I really love getting this information to people. And so however it gets to you, great. But when you get into a coaching environment and you're held accountable, in my opinion, that's what a good coach should do, is hold up the mirror and say, you're saying this, but what you're actually communicating is this. I find that to be very, very helpful. I find immense value in this information and how it transforms worlds. So if you're interested, give me a call. You can do that through the website. You can shoot me an email. Obviously, I've already said that a few times. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, all the stuff. I take these kinds of things and break them down in a small little bite-sized things, I hope, around 45 to 60 seconds. So there you go. That's all my stuff. I'm so glad that you were here this week. This has been episode number 5 of season 2, Defense Mechanisms, a little micro coaching between you and I. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.